Hello, hello. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are so excited to have you here. Hello and welcome. We are delighted to have you here for a discussion with the absolute experts on Agile Retrospectives. They are Esther Derby, Diana Larson, and David Horowitz, co-authors of Agile Retrospectives. Today, they're going to answer all of your questions about facilitating more engaging and impactful retrospectives. As people are joining, take a minute to introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know who you are, where you're joining us from, and what your role is. So we'll see folks letting us know where you're all from. I myself am from Minnesota. We'll introduce ourselves here in a moment. But we would like to see, I love these because you can see that people are joining us from all around the world, right? From Utah to the UK. It's really, really exciting. So while you all introduce yourselves, my name is Jessica Gusteles. I'm an evangelist here at Lucid Software. My background is as an Agile consultant, facilitator, and coach. I am passionate about true collaboration, high-performing teams, and the humans that make up organizations that we're all a part of. I'm delighted to be joined today by our very own Brian Stallings. The two of us have worked together for a number of years, and we hold similar credentials as professional coaches and facilitators. Hey, Brian, would you like to introduce yourselves?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Brian Stallings, the Chief Evangelist at Lucid Software. I've been a leader in the Agile product development community since its inception and have trained and coached hundreds of individuals within teams and organizations. Jessica, you shared what you're passionate about. I would say I'm passionate about new ways of working. I'm passionate about collaboration equity and about the inclusion of neurodivergent individuals in the work that we do. And I'm really excited because we have guests that I've known for 20 years with us today. And because I get to work with one of my favorite colleagues, Jessica, and glad to have these Agile experts with us, Esther, Diana, and David. So let's meet these guests, starting with Esther, and then Diana, and then David, if you would wrap it up with your introduction.
Well, I started my career as a programmer, and I actually came to facilitation through leading technical reviews back when I was a programmer. And I've done a lot of different things throughout my career. I've had most of the roles you can have in software development. Eventually, because I was a good programmer, they made me a manager. Eventually, I moved on to other things, and I have been in the Agile community for a long time. Known for retrospectives, for my work on management and leadership, and for my work on organizational change. And what I'm passionate about is creating more humane workplaces where people can thrive and find joy. And I'm a little under the weather, so I have a cough drop in my mouth. So if you notice that, I apologize. I'm trying to keep from coughing.
So glad you're with us.
Well, I'm Diana Larson. I have been in part of the Agile community, original co-author of the first Agile Retrospectives book. And as Esther kind of gave a little bit of her background, I came to Agile from sort of organization development and work process redesign. And that gave me the many opportunities to facilitate many different kinds of meetings. And so when Esther and I got together to write the first edition, we were able to, blend our strengths in that to kind of figure out what is it people are going to need. And I'm so excited about the new book, adding in all the things that we've learned in all the years since then. So I do keynote talks, I do some mentoring, I do some short-term consulting and training, and my passion is the intersection of leadership, creating learning environments so that for healthy teams. So I phrase it a little differently, but it sounds like Brian and Jessica and Esther and I are kind of all in the same boat here.
So glad you're here.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm David. My career in this space started, about 20 years ago or so, like Esther, as a software developer. But I quickly realized that for me, at least, the technical challenges weren't nearly as interesting as the people challenges in building software. And so I transitioned from writing the code to some management, some agile coaching. And it was there that I discovered this problem. I was working for a large international bank at the time, and we had really struggled to run globally distributed retrospectives. This was before Zoom, before COVID. And it struck me that we couldn't be the only ones who were struggling with this problem. And so I quit my job and started a company called Retrium, which I've been the CEO of ever since. We make software to help you run more effective Agile retrospectives. We are very narrowly focused on that and very proud of it. I really feel like I know Esther and Diana do, that retrospectives, when done right, are truly an agent of learning and change and growth for teams and organizations. And I'm passionate over the past couple of years of bringing consciousness and presence and awareness into the workplace, as opposed to worrying about the future or dealing with the past, just being here now in the present moment. And how can that help teams grow and learn and change?
Fantastic. Well, it's absolutely delightful to have you here and now and present. So thank you for being here. We are thrilled to have the three of you here as the co-authors of the exciting second edition of Agile Retrospectives, a practical guide for catalyzing team learning and improvement. Woohoo! So for nearly 2 decades, Scrum Masters, team leads, coaches, they've all relied on the first edition of Agile Retrospectives as an essential resource to facilitate better retrospectives.
You know, I think I bought my first edition copy from Esther directly. She had it when it first came out, and it became really well worn. And then I gave it to one of the executives I was coaching. And so I have carried a copy around for many, many years. And I was so excited to hear that it was being updated.
Yeah, the update, such exciting news. So published in April of this year, this new edition builds on recent research, reflects all your experience over 2 decades, and shares wisdom gleaned from the global retrospective community. This book is truly filled with practical advice, techniques, and real-life examples that will help you take retrospectives to the next level, whether your team's co-located, hybrid, or remote. This book helps team leads, scrum masters, and coaches engage their teams to learn, improve, and deliver greater results. So feel free to use the QR code to order your copy today. All right, now before we get started in the questions, a couple housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded. You can expect an email with a link to the recording within about a day or two, and it's going to be sent to the email that you use to register for the webinar. That email is also going to include some additional resources, relevant blog posts, and some information about our products and how they integrate, so make sure to look for that then. Live captions are enabled for this webinar, so you can go ahead and turn those on if you'd like. And this conversation is really about your questions. We received a bunch of questions in advance, and we invite you to use Zoom's Q&A feature for additional questions. So you can find that by clicking on the Q&A and entering your questions there. Our Lucid team is working behind the scenes to help answer some of those online, and then we'll be answering a lot of them live. So get your questions in. We also don't want this webinar to be just us talking at you. We want your comments as well. So please, as many of you have already done, use the chat feature to share your thoughts and insights as we discuss. All right, before we get to your questions though, let's turn it over to our experts to really set a foundation for Agile retrospectives.
Yeah, when we first learned about retrospectives, it was big retrospectives at the end of big, long projects with lots and lots of people in it, from Norm Kurth's book, Project Retrospectives. And but as time went by, we realized in the early 2000s that, you know, Agile retrospectives could have a different impact. And we had colleagues who were calling them heartbeat retrospectives and so on, because they blended, as part of the iterative life cycle, inspecting, adapting, learning from our experience, and then applying that to the work that we were doing in an ongoing, continuous cycle. And so when Esther and I wrote the book, we, along with our publisher, came up with this infinity diagram of sort of just continuous improvement happening. And in that, we described where we saw the pathway to an effective retrospective. And it has 5 steps. Set the stage, bring people together, do what you do, some kind of question or activity to get people's attention in the room to do the work of the retrospective, then gather data. What is it we're talking about right now? Getting clear that everybody is on the same page about that they're all focused in the same area of their work. Once we have that shared data, that shared big picture, we want to generate some insights. We want to figure out what we can learn from that experience. And then we want to decide, what does that imply for us next? What could we do to improve our quality, our teamwork, our situation, whatever it happens to be? What could we do to move that forward? And we can talk a little bit about all the different ways that might look. And then finally, closing the retrospective, because very often a retrospective comes kind of bundled with a bunch of end of iteration or end of work chunk, as I like to think about it more, activities like a review or some additional planning that comes after. And so we want to make sure that the retrospective work stays distinct. And so the closing the retrospective gives us time to reflect on how did we do during this retrospective, give ourselves some feedback on that, and then also put a bow on it so that we can move on to what comes next. Now, we created this because it really does replicate what an individual human does in their own brain when they encounter something that they notice and might want to change. So we notice the thing, we take in some sensory input or some actual research input about it. We then decide, how to, or think about what that might be meaningful to us. And then we decide what we want to do about it. And then we move on. When we do that in a group of people, it doesn't happen in a split second like it happens in our own human brains, or can happen in our own human brains. It takes a little more time to make sure that everyone has the same data, that we're all focused on the same problem, that we're looking at the entirety of possibilities of this before we choose something and make a decision about it and move on. So that's where the retrospective 5-step model comes from. And that is something that did not change in our second edition. We are still focused on that model and making sure that people have that ability to not just generate some insights or not just make a snap decision together without having done the earlier processes. So anybody else want to comment on that?
I would just add one thing to it, Diana, which is that one of the things I love most about this infinity diagram is that it provides equal weight between the retrospective on the right and the rest of the iteration on the left. And so often I hear, the retrospective, can't we just skip that? It's just something that doesn't really add value at the end, or it's just a checklist item that we want to check off because our Agile coach tells us to. But rather, what we believe fully is that when you learn together as a group, what you learn can feed into the rest of the work that you're doing in such a way that it has equal import to all of the other work you're doing in the rest of the iteration. So I just wanted to highlight that. It's really critical to me that the retrospective, the importance of the retrospective is highlighted. And I think this diagram does a great job of that.
Yeah, so it becomes part of the flow of the work. Yeah.
I came across an interesting quote from John Dewey, who's a philosopher and educator. And he said, we don't learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experience. So it's not enough to have the experience, you need to reflect on it and reflect on it together. And as Diana said, the 5 steps help people think together, because everybody thinks at their own pace, but when you facilitate a retrospective, it helps people go through that process together. So they're learning together.
Fantastic. Every part of this is just so helpful. And I love, Diana, that this is what we do naturally as human beings. And how great is it that we can be specific about what part of the retrospective we're in and get everybody on the same page. Secretly, it's my favorite event of all of the Agile events. So I'm delighted to be talking about this today. Awesome. All right, let's get into the questions. We did have a few submitted by individuals when they signed up for the webinar. So let's start there while the rest of the audience thinks about and submits their question. So Esther, Diana, and David, since the first edition of the book, what new insights emerged and how have retrospectives evolved?
Wow. Well, the first edition of the book came out in 2006 and Esther and I were working on it for a couple of years before that as people gave us supported us then too by giving us ideas about it. But a few things have changed since 2006 in our work environments, in our understanding of how this rolls out, understanding about where the difficulties are in holding retrospectives. And so that was the real intention behind writing a second edition. It's like, we need to update our thinking and update what we're communicating to people about retrospectives. And so from my point of view, as being involved in the first edition, it's like I think we were maybe even overdue for that. But this was, everything happens in its own time. And so this happened at the right time for us. And so insights I think we'll be talking about a lot of the different insights as we go through the other questions on the list. David?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that likely everyone here is aware of is just the rise of Agile over the past 20 years. And the reason that that's important, of course, is because retrospectives have been taken along for the ride, thankfully, as a result of their inclusion in the Scrum framework. I think it's important to mention that retrospectives didn't come about as a result of Scrum or Agile, but they certainly have gained popularity as a result of those movements. And so as retrospectives have become more popular over the past 20 years, so too, the number of people facilitating retrospectives has increased dramatically, which is a wonderful thing and also presents new challenges that we wanted to address in the book. For example, we have a whole chapter in the new book that's dedicated to example flows through the 5 phases of the retrospective, how you might go about picking certain activities for each of the phases in response to common scenarios you and your team are facing. Maybe it's an outage that's occurred in your production system, or maybe there's some elephant in the room that people just aren't talking about, but it's there. How might Diana, Esther, and I design a retrospective in response to those scenarios? And we felt that that type of advice was even more pertinent now because of how popular retrospectives have become and the breadth of people facilitating them.
We also added more about how to make change stick after a retrospective, because that's one of the frustrations people have, is that they come up with an idea and then, it fades away or nothing happens. And that's often because there are things going on in the organization that are holding the old pattern in place. So we added much more depth to how do you actually get things to change in the retrospective.
Amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Work gets in the way sometimes. Fantastic. We had several questions submitted about participant engagement or the lack thereof during a retrospective. What do you say to those facilitating retrospectives where there feels like there's a lack of engagement from team members, or maybe facilitators are seeing a reluctance to speak up in retrospectives?
I can start on that one. So, I mean, there's a whole host of reasons why engagement might be low, and they can be very simple, almost trivial things like the time of day that you scheduled the retrospective might not be the best time of day for people to be creative and open and interested in the learning experience. It can also be things like the location of the retrospective. If you're picking the same old conference room that you use for all your other meetings, it might not be the right location to stimulate creativity. But it can be more complex reasons too. There could be low psychological safety on the team. There could be a deeply held belief that retrospectives just don't help. So the reason I'm listing these out is because I could talk for the next 2 hours about all the reasons why engagement can be low. And so it's hard to answer the question, here's what you should do about it, until you know the why behind engagement being low. And that leads me to the real answer, which is ask. Ask your team. Right? Take each one of them out one-on-one to coffee, or ask in a group setting, but try to figure out, hey, I've noticed that, the engagement on the retro is low, and I want these meetings to be useful to you. So help me understand how could we make them more beneficial? And through those conversations, you'll find the right solution to low engagement problem.
There's actually an activity described in the first edition and the second edition called ROTI, which stands for Return on Time Invested. And that's an activity you can do to get some information about what would make it more engaging. You ask people, you know, for the time you spend in the retrospective, what kind of return did you get? And after you get those, you know, kind of an indication of that, then you can ask, well, what kept it from being valuable? What would make it more valuable? So there's a number of things you can do, but as David said, first you need to figure out why people are not engaged. One thing I have noticed is that when people remain silent at the beginning of the retrospective, they have tacit permission to remain silent for the rest of the retrospective. So I think a small helpful thing you can do is get every voice in the room early on. And Diana and I and David have observed this over years, but I finally found some research that backs it up. So that made me happy. Get those voices in the room.
Love it. Love it. I love that the thing that you knew in your tummy now has research to back it. That's very cool. Interesting question that was submitted prior to our webinar today. How do you handle retrospectives that involve people from different groups, teams, or departments that might have political or other sorts of baggage between them?
Well, the first thing is to understand more about the baggage. If you are a part of the one of the groups that's going to be involved, but not in the other groups, you know, there needs to be some research about what is everybody's perspective on that particular set of baggage that's sitting there. But then also, if this seems to me like it is implying a large retrospective, a retrospective that is more complex than usual because there are going to be more than just a handful of team members involved. There's going to be people from different departments, or, you know, we're probably looking at a much longer period of time if we're bringing people together for that purpose. And so that might be the time to look around for somebody who's a pretty experienced facilitator, either a professional from outside who could be really neutral on all of the issues, or someone in the organization that has, you know, gained a lot of experience in a lot of different kinds of situations with facilitating meetings, because they are going to know better how to handle the potential for contentiousness, the potential for conflict, the potential for big emotional responses. I mean, whatever you think is there in terms of this difference in political stances or baggage, you know, look for someone to help you with that. And you know, there are other things you might do too. Again, I think, again, David's suggestion of go out and talk to representatives of all of the groups, ask them where they're coming from. Why is this going to be, why might this make the retrospective more challenging than it would otherwise be if it was a small group of people who work together all the time? You know, yeah, Esther.
Just a little caution about when you interview people. Yeah. Sometimes people will put the problem on you.
Yeah.
Like, you know, now that I've told you there's I feel this way about this other department, it's up to you to solve it. It's not. As the facilitator, your job is to hold the space. So if someone, you know, well, you have to bring up this problem that happened, you know, 4 years ago or whatever. No, you don't, as the facilitator of a leader. That's up to the person. I would also say, work your working agreements.
Yeah.
You know, I personally like focus on, focus off as a way to help people think about how are we going to be with each other in this retrospective for this period of time in a way that's going to be most positive and conducive to gaining some insights and solving some problems. So I would, yeah, neutral facilitator, trying to understand what's going on, and then work on setting the stage.
And
working your working agreements. I love that.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, David.
Yeah, to build on the working agreements idea, here's a prompt that I think I found useful, and maybe you will also in this specific scenario while building working agreements. So it would go something like, as a team, we handle conflict most effectively when, ... And that gets the team thinking positively about how are we going to approach this problem going forward in a way that's constructive for the team. And it's important that this is really a collaborative, bottom-up brainstorming session where people truly have a voice in building out those working agreements, not something where, and I remember back to my kindergarten or first grade days where the teacher came in with a preset set of rules, but just kind of made you feel like you had the ability to change them or modify. That's not what we're talking about here. This is truly something where the team should brainstorm and come up with the working agreements themselves. But I'll just repeat that prompt. It's, as a team, we handle conflict most effectively when. And let's see where it goes.
Love it. Lovely. Fantastic. So that was on the one side where there's a potential for conflict. We had several questions also submitted regarding inviting more real or candid feedback. They feel like their teams are being cautious maybe about hurt feelings. How might you invite some of those, as you mentioned, elephants in the room,
I think it goes back to safety, right? You have to get curious about why people are so hesitant. You have to create enough safety for people to bring things up, because there is always some friction for bringing up conflict or controversy or divergent opinions. There's always some friction about that. So work on understanding where that comes from and then making it safe enough for people to do it, and giving them some templates perhaps for how to bring up things that are difficult, like David just offered one. So help people state things in a way that isn't blaming, that isn't likely to inflame things. Yeah, because if you don't have safety, you're not going to have people bringing things up. So try to reduce that friction, create some safety. So
Well, and retrospectives might not be the right place for people to give peer-to-peer feedback.
they're
Like in
definitely
front
not
of everybody
that.
else, right?
Yeah.
So that may be some work you need to do outside of the retrospective to create more psychological safety, as Esther mentions, is, give people some skills around offering feedback to each other, or, handling the things that might be potentially big conflicts when they're still just little small annoyances before they become resentments, right? That kind of thing. And so as a mnemonic that I use when I want to give somebody feedback, I only give feedback to someone if I can do it with caring and respect. And two, I focus on the fact that I want to have a good working relationship. So I will start a feedback session with, because I really want to have the best possible working relationship with you, I want to tell you about something. Is this a good time? Right. And then, then you can move on from there with some of the other techniques and things that are out there. Lots of people offer good techniques. Beware the praise sandwich. But there are a lot of other good ways out there to give feedback, but do that outside of the retrospective, not inside of it.
It's so helpful to have models, and there are a lot out there. It makes it easy when we all know what the models are, to know, oh, this person is giving feedback, and also be aware that feedback is actually harder for the feedback giver oftentimes than it is for the receiver, because we get all worked up about it when actually the other person, if you're in that good working relationship, is going to appreciate it.
Yeah, so feedback is information.
Yeah.
Right. So we need to present it as information, and it can be interpersonal. It can be about a situation. It can be about a process.
Mm-hmm.
It can be about a lot of things, right? It's not necessarily, I want to give you feedback because I'm annoyed with something you did.
Mm-hmm.
Here, I'll offer one way that I found to be really helpful in giving feedback, and I'll preface this by saying it's useful before you jump into kind of an emotionally charged situation and you start experimenting with these new techniques or new approaches, try doing it in a lower temperature atmosphere first so that the team can learn a little bit and play with it.
Yeah.
That's generally helpful. But there's a technique that we bring up in the book, the second edition, that wasn't there in the first one, called facts, stories, and emotions. And the idea of facts, stories, and emotions is to help, first of all, you understand the feedback that you're giving and the difference between things that are indisputably true, just the facts about what's happening. Like, for example, we are on a webinar right now and I'm talking to you. Those are facts. We can't argue with them, right? And then the stories around them, like I could have given a better answer to the first question that was asked of me earlier in the webinar. I'm making this up, right? Or maybe some of you are multitasking right now. I don't know. I can't see you. So these are stories, right? But to make sure that I am very clear when I'm saying these things, that I'm telling you that I'm making them up and I don't know if they're true or not. This is a way of separating out things that are commonly understood, the facts, from the things that I'm curious about. I want to know, is this true or is this not? And then finally, facts, stories, and emotions. So how does it make me feel when these things happen? And practicing structuring your feedback in that style can help, again, lower the temperature and create an environment of curiosity for the team.
Love it. Thank you so much for that. And I also appreciate the friendly reminder that when we learn new things, oftentimes we want to use our new toys. And so making sure that you're using your new toys in less charged areas first to practice is such a valuable.
Yeah. One other thing about this is if you are a coach or a scrum master and you're in a role like that, there is this pothole in front of you where some team member is going to come to you, sort of like Esther was talking about earlier, and saying, this issue happened between me and so, I'd like you to bring it up in the retrospective. And we call that triangulating, right?
Don't do that.
Don't just say, gosh, I will make space for you to bring it up. I will sit with you while you have a conversation with this person. I'll do what I can to help make this not easy, but easier for you to give this feedback directly. But I am not going to facilitate it in the retrospective. And being able to hold a boundary around that is really important. If it's issues between team members, that's a thing that happens too often, and you don't want to take that on.
Yeah, now I have to tell a story. So I got a call once from a manager whose team was just in disarray. There were hurt feelings, there was anger, people were just not, their relationships were really broken. So I asked a little bit about what was going on, and the manager had decided to run a retrospective where everybody had to go around the room and give one piece of positive feedback and one piece of negative feedback to each of their other teammates in public. And it was awful. So don't fall into that trap either.
Right.
Beware. That sounds just, can you imagine sitting
Sounds awful.
at that event? Like, I would walk out of there in tears, I think. Okay. So let's pull from some of the Q&A section. The very first question that we could answer is, I find that it's difficult to get developers excited about retrospectives. What tips and tricks do you have to set the stage for retrospectives to get the team excited about sharing feedback? I find the process becomes repetitive and monotonous.
So
Have
go ahead.
a retrospective about something they care about. Right? If they feel the retrospective is about a topic that they don't care about, of course, they're not going to be engaged. So focus on some problem that is important to them.
Nailed it. Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Developers love improving, by the way.
Yeah.
Yes.
Technical improvements to the code, they love that. This is all stereotypes, but stereotypically, they love that. So find a problem, like Esther said. They actually like improving. It's real.
Oh, awesome. And yes, I love it. The next question, what is the best way to keep track of feedback if you're doing retros every sprint?
I'm curious what they mean by feedback. Do they mean action items? Do they
That would be my
mean,
guess. Yeah.
yeah,
How do we keep track of maybe the experiments that we're running?
I would treat them like regular work and track them like you do all your work.
It is work. It
Yeah,
is
it is
regular work.
regular
I mean, that's the shift. That's the mindset shift that needs to happen, is in this day and age, learning about our work and learning what we can do to improve our work is part of our work.
Mhm.
And we ignore it at our peril. That's how people get, lose traction. That's how, yeah, I think it is that emphasis on, this isn't something we do that's separate from our work. This is part of our work. Just like if you're a senior engineer, it is part of your work to mentor the juniors. It's not that you go off and just write the very best code you can and show everybody else how great you are. That doesn't make a senior engineer, right? So holding in the retrospectives, holding a retrospectives is part of the work. Mentoring is part of the work. Those learning activities are part of the work. Otherwise, we don't move forward.
And just like you hang, let's say the burn down chart in a very big, public, visible way in your team room, also, you can make action items or experiments into big visualizations in your team room. Here's a simple example. Let's say your action item is something like speak with the product owner at least 5 times during the upcoming sprint. I don't know. I'm making this up off the top of my head. That translates itself really easily. And I hope, by the way, you're speaking more frequently than that to the product owner. But that's just an example. Hang a big flip chart in your team room and mark off tally marks every time you speak with the product owner. And by hanging it there, it becomes hard to miss and hard not to do something about. So just make them big and make them visible like the rest of your work, and it'll help you with follow through.
Right. Well, I'm at the risk of beating this question too much. And if you are a remote team, make sure you have some central location, like a Lucid board or something, where things like that appear, where you are going to regularly, and you can see what your experiment is, along with maybe seeing everything else that's on your dashboard. Figure out how to keep those things visible. And being remote doesn't excuse you from doing that.
Love it. Make things big and visible. And I also heard educate your team. We don't need to just throw them at retrospectives. Let's actually talk about the value of what we're doing. It's really, really fantastic. Thank you. Let's see. What guidance would you provide around anonymity of participants during the event?
I want to make sure I heard that. It's what guidance would you provide around anonymity?
Yes.
Like if we're gathering data, Esther, when do we gather that data, anonymous data from team members, instead of like write your name on the bottom of your sticky?
I guess if safety is really low, then I might use anonymous data collection. My experience is that very often people will eventually say, oh, that was me who put up that sticky, if they feel safe enough to do it, or if it was me who made that comment.
Yeah, there isn't a one size fits all answer to that. I think that's why we're all pausing here, I think, is there's not a one size fits all answer to this particular question. It depends on, I'm sorry, but it depends on what is the activity you're running and what part of the what step of the retrospective are you in? If we're at the part where we're examining alternatives to decide what to do, I wouldn't want that to be anonymous. It's hard for me to imagine when I would want that to be anonymous, but maybe there's a time. If we're gathering data, you know, if you know that's an issue, look for as much objective data as you can, as the facilitator, bring to the retrospective, or maybe distribute in advance to the retrospective. So you kind of take that need for anonymity out of it. And I go back to David's recommendation earlier. If this is a thing, let's be talking to each team member. And if we're talking about this as a team, talk to each individual team member about what it is that they're afraid of if their ideas get tagged to them, you know, and it can be a lot of different reasons. It can be, I'm more influential on the team and I know that, and so I don't want to put my name on something in case it skews what everybody else says. Well, that's a good reason potentially for anonymity. But also then if I don't want anybody to know what I think, that's a different. So it really does depend. And that's why there's not an easy answer for this, but examine the motivations, examine what you're trying to accomplish, the facilitator's motivations, what are you trying to accomplish with the activities that you're presenting, if it's more than just questions. And then also be sure you're in touch with the team members and their point of view on this. And if they're wanting to be anonymous, sorry, Esther, if they're wanting to be anonymous because they don't want you as the coach or you as the scrum master to know they said X, Y, or Z, then maybe it's time to have somebody else, you be a participant and somebody else facilitate the retrospective.
Yeah, so as I'm reflecting on this, the times I am most inclined to have anonymous data is during set the stage. So there's one activity that I often do when I really want to emphasize safety, where I ask people to fill in the blanks in 2 sentences. When I feel safe, I can, or I do, or when I don't feel safe, I can, or I do. And I collect those responses and I keep them anonymous. And then I just read them. I read all the when I don't feel safe responses, and I read all the when I do feel safe responses. And I keep that entirely anonymous. If I'm doing some kind of safety check, I keep it anonymous. In the interest of building safety.
We've got time for maybe 1 sentence to answer the following question from each of you. What's the best way to engage leadership support the value of retros?
1 sentence.
1 sentence question. Answer.
Okay, a couple of sentences.
Get to know your leader. Learn what they care about.
And do a subjective impact analysis so you can get some sense of what gains or improvements the team has made as the result of their retrospectives.
Evidence, I love it. Thank you, thank you, thank you. First of all, I'm pretty sure that we could talk about this for days.
Pretty sure too.
We have many, many, many more because we've got a ton more questions, and I apologize that we weren't able to get to all of them. They're such great questions. Thank you all for submitting questions. Huge thank you to Esther, Diana, and David for amazing insights. And we also know that for many of us, conversations like this benefit from a real life example. So Brian and I are gonna share a bit of a story with you that's gonna highlight some of the things that are in the Agile Retrospective book and some of the things that we've talked about here today. Brian, you're on mute.
Thank you. And it's also a little bit like we're on display right now in front of some of our teachers, because we're about to show an example where we've implemented the ideas from this book, and hopefully that will really make this practical for those of you that are viewers. So hopefully we see David, Diana, and Esther nodding and smiling and not giving us a thumbs down as we share this example. So what you'll see is a virtual whiteboard that Jessica and I built for that retrospective. And I want to caution you not to focus and suggest that, oh, if I just had that template that Brian and Jessica created, everything would be fine. Because that canvas is just a background on which we hosted really important collaborative conversations. which is what we call the retrospective, right? In fact, I want to share a quote from the book we've been discussing today, Agile Retrospectives, the second edition. It says, quote, "Never let tools dictate how you design your retrospective, excuse me. Even when a tool has a template set up to categorize virtual sticky notes, it doesn't mean you're limited to that. Use the capabilities of the tool to support your design, not to be your retrospective design."
That's right. So as Brian mentioned, this is a real example of a retrospective we designed and facilitated that teams, and the other thing we know is that retrospectives, what teams share in retrospectives really isn't shared elsewhere. So we've sanitized the content for this and changed the names.
That's right. Here's a little background. This is from a program level retrospective. So 5 teams were working together, all from different functional areas within Lucid. And while those teams held team level retrospectives along the way, this story is about a combined retrospective that occurred at the end of many months of joint work and at the end of releasing their first shared deliverable.
And like all the best retrospective, we use the same 5 steps that Diana took us through at the beginning. Thank you, Diana. That provided our structure from which we designed the basics of our retrospective journey.
That's right. So I just want to be clear that using the same steps that we saw in the diagram, it doesn't mean the retrospective is always going to be the same. In this case, we overlaid an adventure theme. And the reason for that was after many months of challenging work, the team had recognized a need to celebrate how far they had come together and also look back on their journey. And being that many of the team lived in Utah, we sort of used this metaphor of hiking up a mountain together in crafting our design. And so we used visuals that Jessica's sharing with you to get them thinking about reaching that high overlook with its amazing views, and then being able to turn and look back along the trail and reflect on their journey and the successful outcomes. And we asked them to consider, what if one member of our hiking party here were to say, great project, let's do this the same exact journey again? How do you think they might respond?
Absolutely not. My shoes gave me blisters. Or maybe we could spend, next time we go on this hike, maybe we could spend some more time at the waterfall. I really liked that part. Or I would agree to do this journey with you all again if we bring better snacks. Always snacks are an issue.
It's about the snacks with teams, right? So, yeah, so with that concept in mind, we moved to craft activities that would lead to the conversations here on this collaborative space. And we started, Jessica, with setting the stage.
Setting the stage. So step 1, setting the stage. As you can see, the way that we started off is we actually had the executive sponsor provide a pre-recorded video championing the participants for their grand adventure. We had our adventurers, the participants. We had our destination, our purpose and outcomes. We had our trail guide, our agenda, so everybody knew where we were headed. And as we mentioned earlier, we had our base camp or our meeting agreements.
So with this solid footing from opening, creating safety, and getting ready to be all on the same page, we continued with the gather data step. And we uncovered this empty timeline that you're seeing here, which included a swim lane for each team. And this is an exercise that's in the book. I learned this from Esther and Diana. And so participants first, they added items to the timeline. And we saw things on cards here, everything from when I joined the initiative and key actions that happened along the way, milestones that occurred, and the timeline filled up. Each team worked together. And then we added something else in the book, color code dots, where you can see we had smiley and frowny faces, green and red. And the team added those along the timeline, indicating when they had felt things about events where they felt good or where they had struggled and there were bad feelings, right? And so with that data now on the board, they went to the bottom in kind of the mustard yellow area, and they charted each team member's emotional journey along what we called an emotional seismograph, also in the book.
Next, we move to generate insights. And this is our view from the top. So after all of this data we uncovered about our hike or our program, we can now look out over the experience and inspect the data we've gathered. Given all of this information about what happened, what insights or patterns might we point to? In this example, we used a version of the 4 L's.
Also in the book, right? So with that awareness, right, generating insights, the team looked at all those insights and said, what's really actionable here in a phase we call decide what to do. And ours we called for our next hike. Since we're going to be working together again for our next hike, are we going to get new shoes? Are we going to get better snacks, right? Like Jessica pointed out. So with all of those insights, what are we going to do about them? And so we decided there was some actions to take, some experiments to run, and importantly, we wanted to decide a measurement, like how will we know if this is actually helping? And this brings us to where we started to close, during which participants spent some time sharing appreciations. And we did this on, can we go back a little bit to those fun backpacks?
Yeah.
Since we were hiking together, we used that backpacks metaphor, and individuals put them here and then shared that feedback, whether it was a fun emoji or a sticky with some comments that then people were able to discuss. Thank you, Jessica.
Backpacks were a lot of fun. Then the last thing we did, like any good Agilist, we asked for feedback on the retrospective event itself using what we call the feedback door. Awesome. Thanks, Brian, for walking through that with me. This really was a fun event, and a really such a great example of how impactful using all 5 steps can be.
Can I add one thing in there?
Yeah.
That was charming, and I really enjoyed seeing it. But and I know that we were going through it very quickly. But I just would like to add that after each of those activities that you did, I am absolutely 100% confident that you looked at what you had generated and debriefed what people saw there and what learning they got from that step before they went on to the next step.
Oh,
and a lot of people just think they can do activity without stopping and making meaning of the output of that particular step or that activity. And so I didn't want the opportunity to go by without kind of highlighting that as well.
Thank
So
you.
appreciate that. That's yes. The sense making is where the juiciness came from. Absolutely. Thank you.
And we could share that while we went through it quickly as a team, it was more than about a 3-hour time frame to go through all of those discussions.
Yeah. It wasn't just stickies and move on. We really spent a lot of time in collaborative conversation, the value of the collaborative conversation. I just want to say once again, thank you so much for our expert panel for joining us today. It's just been an absolute joy to listen to you and to gain your insights. It's been an absolute delight. I also just want to say thank you so much for all of your out there audience engagement and participation. I know we got a gazillion questions and I wanted to be able to answer them all, but thank you for joining us. Thank you for participating. Once again, we've put the QR code up for the Esther, Diana, and David's book. And for all of you, we have one last ask before you go. Please put in the chat one thing that you learned today, one thing that excited you, or one thing that you're going to try. We'd really love to hear this. This helps us to understand what are the things that were totally fascinating, what's something that surprised you. All of that is really helpful for us before you go. So thank you so much for once again for coming. Really appreciate it. Retros can be fun. Yeah, they can be.
I like the backpack idea. We called it swag. All right, everybody needs, what was it we called it, Jessica? Everybody needs some
badges, like cool swag on their bags.
Yeah, that was fun. They like the layout of the board, the topic about getting to know your leaders. I think that was great advice. Got some people looking forward to reading the book. I think you should cover to cover and then mark it up. How to build safety, spending more time. Wow, lots of things coming in. We learn from reflecting on our experience. Absolutely true.
Awesome.
Return on time investment. It feels like this is a little mini retrospective on the things that were learned during the webinar. So nicely played there, Jessica.
Yes, really appreciate it.
Thank you so much to our guests, and Jessica, thank you so much for driving.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. Have a fantastic rest of your morning, afternoon, evening, night, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Bye all.